Welcome to my channel, where every story is darker than the last. If you love horror, mysteries, and the unknown, you're in the right place. The Unspoken Files, where we uncover the most terrifying and unexplained mysteries in history. If you love horror, true ghost stories, and haunted objects, then you've come to the right place. Tonight's story is one that will make you think twice before looking out your window at night. A story of isolation, paranoia, and something much more sinister lurking in the shadows. Imagine moving into your dream apartment, a fresh start, a new city, a new life. But what if, one night, you start noticing something strange? A man in the window, standing perfectly still, watching you. At first, it seems harmless, a coincidence. But then, you realize, no matter what time of day or night you look, he's always there, motionless, unblinking. And then, you start to wonder, is he watching you? Or is something far worse at play? This is the story of Sarah and the horrifying truth she discovered about the man in the window. Sarah had been looking for a place to live for weeks. She had just landed her dream job in a new city and was eager to start fresh. After a long search, she found a cozy, one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building that seemed perfect. The rent was affordable, and the location was quiet, just what she needed. The apartment even had a beautiful view of the city skyline, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. At first, everything seemed ideal. Sarah unpacked her things and settled into her new home. But after a few nights, she began to notice something odd. Across the street, in a building that looked almost identical to hers, there was a man. He appeared in the window of the apartment directly across from hers. He was tall, thin, with shaggy hair, and every night, without fail, he stood perfectly still, staring out of the window. Sarah first thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was someone's roommate or a neighbor who liked to stand by the window, thinking, or lost in thought. But then, she began to notice that every time she looked out her own window, no matter what time of day or night, it was the same man, in the same spot, standing still, staring. There was something off about it, something unsettling. He never moved. He never seemed to blink. And when Sarah looked at him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking right back at her. It was as if he knew she was watching him, and he was waiting for her to look. At first, Sarah convinced herself it was nothing, just a quirky neighbor. Maybe he had some sort of routine, or maybe he didn't even know she was there. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched gnawed at her. Days turned into weeks, and the man never moved. Always in the same spot. Always staring. It was starting to get to her, so much so that she couldn't focus on anything else. Every time she went near the window, she'd look across the street, half expecting to see him there. And he was. It started to affect her sleep. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, and there he was, standing in the window. Not moving, not blinking, just standing there. It wasn't just disturbing, it was suffocating. He was always there. One night, Sarah decided she was going to confront him. She took a deep breath, grabbed her keys, and walked over to the building across the street. The whole time, she kept thinking about how crazy it seemed, how paranoid she had become. But something in her told her that if she didn't do something, she wouldn't be able to sleep at night. She had to know who he was. When she got to the building, she rang the buzzer to the apartment where she thought he lived. No answer. She tried again, then again. No one came to the door. She stood there for a few minutes, feeling both ridiculous and terrified. She was just about to leave when something caught her eye. Through the small window of the apartment's door, she saw something that made her freeze. The man from the window was inside the building. He was standing in the hallway, facing her. His eyes were wide, and he was staring at her through the glass. Her heart stopped. He wasn't looking at her like someone who was simply curious or friendly. He was staring at her, almost in a way that made her feel trapped. It wasn't just that he had been watching her. It was that he knew she had been watching him too. Freaked out, Sarah ran back to her apartment, her pulse racing. That night, she locked every window and door, terrified that somehow he was inside her building, or worse, that he might have followed her back. Over the next few days, she kept a closer eye on the apartment across from hers, but there was no sign of the man. He wasn't standing in the window anymore, and she felt a brief sense of relief. But that sense of safety quickly turned to dread when she began to notice something that sent chills down her spine. As she looked across the street, she realized that the window of the apartment where the man had stood was completely empty, but it wasn't just empty in the way she thought. There was no furniture, no blinds, no curtains. It looked like the apartment had been abandoned. That night, Sarah decided to do some research. She went online and checked public records for the building across from hers. The strange thing was, the apartment she was looking at didn't even seem to exist in any records. No one had lived there in years. "There's no apartment there," he said. "That floor's been vacant for months. It's been boarded up for renovation. No one lives there." That's when it hit Sarah. The man wasn't just watching her. He had been stuck there, his presence trapped in a place that no longer existed, unable to leave. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that, for weeks, the man in the window hadn't been a real person. He was some kind of apparition, or worse, a shadow of someone who had once lived there, but had never left. As Sarah turned to leave, she saw the reflection of the man in the glass door of the building, standing perfectly still, staring at her, just as he had every single day. She turned quickly, her heart pounding, but when she looked back, the door was empty. That night, Sarah packed her bags in a frenzy, her hands trembling as she shoved clothes into a suitcase. She didn't care about neatness. She just needed to get out. Every second in that apartment felt unbearable, as if something unseen was pressing down on her. Still, before leaving, she risked one last glance at the window across the street. Empty. For the first time, the man wasn't there. A chill ran down her spine. Maybe she had imagined it all. Maybe it had been stress, paranoia, a trick of the mind. She turned away, hurried to her car, and drove off, refusing to look back. But something gnawed at her, the feeling that she wasn't truly free. 1 month later, Sarah had moved to a new apartment, far from the city. She never left the curtains open, never risked looking out at night. But the nightmares continued. One evening, she woke abruptly, a sense of unease tightening around her chest. The apartment was silent, but something felt wrong. She stepped into the living room, her pulse quickening. The curtains, always shut, were shifting slightly, as if someone had just brushed past them. Her hands shook as she reached for the fabric and pulled it back. Nothing. Just the glass, reflecting her dimly lit apartment. Then her breath caught. In the reflection, behind her, a man, standing still, watching. She spun around. Nothing. But she knew better. She wasn't alone. And neither are you. Go ahead, check your window. You never know who might be watching.